Carmel, New Jersey, and we were having a conversation when some of you came on about his time as senior rabbi closer to us at Congregation Makor Shalom in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. As we're going to hear this evening, a major part of Rabbi Adras's work has been the development and the implementation of the project on sacred aging, of which our WISE aging group, many of them, participated and brought him in for some training. This project has been responsible for creating awareness and resources for congregations on the implications of emerging longevity revolution, and this revolution has begun to impact, as we know in our congregation, all aspects of our congregational and communal life. And one of the things I learned from reading the longer, I'm not going to go through all the books that he wrote, quite impressive, is that beginning 4 years ago, he began hosting a weekly podcast, Seekers of Meaning. You're still doing that podcast?
Oh yeah.
So you can look it up, Seekers of Meaning, which is dedicated to discussing issues relating to aging, spirituality, its impact on families and congregations. And Rabbi Adras, Bavakasha, all yours.
Toda Rabbi. First of all, mazel tov to you and your transition, and I wish you haslacha and just most of all health and peace. Next chapter is very exciting, very, very exciting. Lots to do. Anyway, Valerie, thank you for helping, all the tech stuff, because I'm technologically challenged, especially since my grandchildren are not next to me, pointing out how dumb and old I am. So here's my assignment with you in the next hour and like 13 minutes is to walk through some of the issues of the ethics around caregiving, the Jewish approaches to this, with a specific emphasis as we conclude on this concept which is emerging as a major issue called the development of a care plan, some of which we've written about and posted on Jewish Sacred Aging. The website is jewishsacredaging.com. I invite you to check it out. It's really the only coordinated, organized workshop website in the Jewish world that just specifically deals with the issues that we're talking about. Lee, she's over there. Lee Richmond writes for us, as well as many other people from around North America on issues related to what we're talking about. And thank you for the plug for the podcast, which new one airs on the website and the Facebook page, but the website's really the way to get it, every Friday. And then for those of you who go through it and would like to write, that's how Lee started to write for us and a couple other people. We always welcome articles and opinions and reflections from people from our congregational community, regardless, across the world. And we're lucky to have some of those people do that. Enough of that. Let's talk about this issue, which is the number one requested concern about all the workshops and programs that we do in congregations, and it has to do with caregiving. How many of you, show of hands, either your real hand or the Zoom yellow hand, how many of you were with me when we did the series for the Wise Aging Consortium during the winter? How many? 1, 2, 3, okay, 4. Okay, about a bunch of you, and we have about 22 screens on the call. So for those of you who are with, I may just repeat just a little bit of it. I'm not gonna, so don't get angry or Beth, you have your hand up. Okay, I got you.
We would love to hear it again.
No, it takes too long, and I really have to be. I watch my time because I'm going to try to condense about a 2.5 hour thing and with new stuff in a little bit of time. And as you know from before, if you have a question, raise your hand or throw something at the screen, as opposed to a formal Q&A at the end. That may be a better way to do this. Okay. So let's first of all talk about some of the overview and the statistics of caregiving. We are in a caregiving tsunami. As my generation, because all of you probably are younger than I am, as the baby boom generation, I'm in my mid-70s. as our generation now is really moving towards aging out, the baby boom generation basically is between people in their mid to late 50s to their mid 70s. We used to be the largest population cohort in America. We were passed about a year and a half ago by the millennials. As we have learned a lot about caregiving from taking care of our own parents. Some of you on this call may still be caring for aging parents or spouses or even, God forbid, children. We now expect because of the medical technology breakthroughs and what we've seen our parents do, we expect to live well into our 70s, 80s, and 90s. And if you recall what we did with the health and wellness stuff, medical technology, and a lot of the other contributing factors, public health, has made that possible. And as we talked about a little bit in one of the other sessions, the one thing that we cannot control, the spiritual question for all of us, is about time. And to condense a longer conversation, the spiritual question I will suggest to you for us now, for our generation, is what do we do with the time we have left, knowing that we cannot control the time we have left? That's part of a larger conversation for another workshop at another time, but I want to lay that as the foundation because that really is part of the foundation. Caregiving now is an intergenerational thing. For those of you who've ever dined at the most expensive and haute cuisine places where I live in southern New Jersey, outside of Philly, you'll know a diner. And the basic classic meal of the diner is your basic club sandwich. That's what caregiving is. In the popular press, as I mentioned before, you sometimes have this phrase, the sandwich generation. We do not use that in my work. We use the word club sandwich generation. Why? Because it is multi-generational now caregiving. It is no longer unusual. You know people like this, and they're in your congregation, and your rabbi's here. I hope he'll validate this. You'll have people around 65, 70 years of age who still may be caring for an elderly parent in their 90s, at the same time being intimately involved with their adult children. And if they are blessed enough to live close to their own grandchildren, intimately involved, sometimes almost on a caregiving basis with their own grandchildren, and vice versa, and a few lines. If we were joining on the board here, the lines would go all the way around. So the first thing I want to do is talk about some of the trends and some of the statistics. Then I want to overview very, very briefly, because it's a much longer conversation, and with some tech study about the Jewish approach, and then finish up with what that means about developing a care plan. So if you will join me in saying a small prayer to the technology gods, who are very fickle and do not necessarily like me. But I'm going to pray that I'm going to share this screen. If not, Valerie's in the backup. So push, click. Thank you, gods. All right. Now, hopefully you all can see that. These statistics and statements are drawn from, as you can see here, the World Health Organization, AARP, the Genworth study of last year of caregivers, our research, AARP, a bunch of other stuff. New study. This is recent. This is from the Genworth, which is a insurance agency that monitors caregiving, as well as AARP. You get a lot of this stuff on aap.org and click on caregiving. 42 million are serving as family caregivers, spending more than 1/4 of their household income for a caring of a loved one. One of the things we talk about a lot in one of the other sessions is the economics of aging. There's a significant economic impact on families. Caregiving is a family systems issue. The out-of-pockets, this statement goes to one of the challenges of America. This is a social justice issue, and your social justice committee at the synagogue hopefully will be involved in this. This number 2 indicates and gives you an inkling into the growing dichotomy, financial and accessibility dichotomy in the United States of America at the present time, of which is, and it's growing since the pandemic. The hiring of an outside caregivers. I had to do this with my mom. Some of you may have done this with a relative or a family member, bringing in somebody These are figures drawn from last year. And every time I've done this, everybody laughs and says it's crazy. It's much higher. There is a real shortage of caregivers. I ran into this with my own family this year, where we could not get, we needed somebody to go in and help out a couple of family, and we called several agencies. They did not have enough staff to be caregivers, and this is part of what we're dealing with now. Pandemic triggered a 25% increase in anxiety. The mental health, again, this we're running very fast here, but these are the mental health crisis. Just put this on the on our website. I do a weekly Torah commentary aimed at older adults, and for this particular parasha and more, the passage in 21:16 to 23, I think, talking about mum, the defect, and the issue of the real stigma still of mental health. And then May is National Mental Health Awareness. There's stress and strain, especially on caregivers. There's been enough statistics, literature, everything on here to validate this. 3.5 years reported average duration of loved one's need for long-term care. That's if you're dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia, which is exploding. It can be not only 3.5, it could be decades. It could be a decade, it could be 2 decades. You probably have some people in your congregation who are doing this. 49%, almost half, reported their loved ones required assistance with the activities of daily living, ADL. This is an outgrowth, this is a shift. It used to be more caregivers were women, but because of the shift in family dynamics, it's almost equal now. And one of the largest groups of caregivers that are emerging are millennials. This is this multi-generational thing. 50% of the caregivers, 57 children under 18 at home. These are, you can read this, 72% are married or in long-term partnerships. And 42% say that caregiving negatively affected their relationship with their spouse or partner. I will guarantee you that if you lined up the colleagues, the clergy in the Baltimore area and ask them if they've ever had some of these conversations about tension within a marriage around caregiving and caring for children, managing children, sometimes one of the spouses gets lost. I will guarantee you that if you lined up all those clergy, the overwhelming majority would say, yeah, I've had to deal with some of this in a pastoral counseling role. 55% are employed. It does impact caregiving impacts jobs, stress, to fix that. The economics of aging, you reach into your own pocket. Remember, I don't know your congregation very well. I know where you are in Owens Mills because I know the area. I used to go to, with my dad and my stepmother, the old Theater in the Round tent off of Reisterstown Road. Some of you may not even remember that. But that was... saw Irma LaDuce there with Juliette Prowse. We're talking now 60s, so this is a long time ago. Majority of carers have dipped into their own savings. I will guarantee you that significant numbers of the members of your congregation are one medical crisis away from financial concern. One. Costs of now here's the cost of assisted living rooms, singles keep going. Somebody tell me real fast in Baltimore County where you guys are. If you want to put somebody in an assisted living facility in your area, what's about the average monthly cost? And I know they vary in quality. Is it? Let me put it this way: is it over $3,000 a month?
Yes.
Okay. Is it over $4,000 a month? A nice one, someplace that you would want to go to.
Yes.
4 to 5 grand.
4 to 5. That's another thing, because this is something that needs to be discussed. This is part of the economics of aging. We're now rushing to Medicare, Social Security. There are not enough people working full-time in the United States of America, paying into these programs now, just as the baby boomers are rushing into Medicare and Social Security. Nobody wants to deal with this because lawmakers have no guts. But the reality is, this is a truth. This is a true statement. And remember that there are more people in the United States of America right now, there are more people over the age of 65 than there are 5 years of age and younger. And the Jewish community, our community, is at least 20 to 25% over the age of 65, with the largest sub-cohort of that people over the age of 85. Spiritual dimensions of caregiving are overwhelming. So the economic impact of caregiving, the spiritual impact of caregiving, the family dynamics aspect of caregiving, and if you factor in long distance caregiving, which a lot of people have to do, you're dealing with, and the fact that it lasts longer. In fact, it is quite possible right now, there are people looking at this, that for a family in your congregation, the cost and the stress involving finding some facility for ourselves or our parents, those costs supersede the cost of childcare. Because if you put a kid in preschool, they're there for what? 2-3 years? If you have to place someone in a facility, they may very well be there for a lot longer than 2 or 3 years. So that this aspect of what we call in our program the economics of aging, rarely are people looking at this. And in truth, we have a study guide on the website, and it's one of the workshops we do. There's actually Jewish text on the concept of single payer and the equality of an equity of who pays, and does a society have the responsibility to provide a basic level of health care to its citizens. It's based upon, I'm summarizing a longer workshop, it's based upon, and this is across the denominational line, because in the study guide that's on the workshop, we have representations from all denominations. It's based upon an understanding of the concept of tzedakah, of tzedek, of justice. And if it's just, and we just read Leviticus 19 last Shabbat morning, although my granddaughter was her bat mitzvah and she killed it when she chanted Leviticus 19, but that's just a grandfather gloating. Spare you the rest. But in Leviticus 19, there's another one of the classic texts on aging about, look, you have to be respectful. You stand up, you rise. So there's this conversation within the tradition about this. It's based upon this concept of tzedek. So the economics, I hope I'm not talking too fast, but I got a lot of stuff to get out and we don't have that much time. So this overview is I want to show you that this is an economic issue. It is a family systems issue. It is a spiritual issue. It is an issue that transcends generations. So parenthetically, one of the things I hope that grows out of our conversation tonight is, as you sit down and plan, especially through the Shleimut program, because this is right down your alley, as you plan programming for next year, I beg you to really try to create, if you haven't done it already, a series of congregational forums dealing with all of these issues, with elder care attorneys, medical social workers, the financial planning, the Jewish component of this. People need to be educated to know. We've put together health fairs with congregations where they've taken over the social hall, and we've done a keynote around this globally, and then the representatives from the Federation and Assisted Living and CCRCs, et cetera, Jewish Family Service are around there in the social hall, and people can, it's a good program and it does work. And don't worry about the numbers, because people who aren't there this year are going to need it next year. Okay, so statistical background. How does Judaism? So this is a little bit of a repeat from one of the things we did with the Wise Aging cohort. It's all based upon two words, kabed and tir'u, 3 repetitions of the 10 Commandments, Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Honor your father and mother. Kabed is the key word there in Exodus and Deuteronomy. And we just read this on Shabbos morning. Tir'u, respect the mother and father. They reverse it. The tradition says that's to tell you that everybody has to be treated equally. So what does it mean to honor and what does it mean to respect? That's the classic questions that are based upon a very, very long and detailed conversation that appears in the Talmud. If you don't believe me, you can go to Masechet Kiddushin. Those of you who have Sefaria or an English translation of the Talmud, I think you want to go to Kiddushin. I think it's 32a or 32b, where you will find a detailed conversation and analysis of the 10 Commandments and what does it mean to honor and what does it mean to respect. This is where the entire corpus of the Jewish conversation around caregiving begins. Parenthesis number 2, we actually put on our website, because I did it for CTAC a year ago, how to create a program around caregiving for a congregation. It's somewhere on the website, I think in the resources section, and it summarizes a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, so you can just plug it into the congregation. So the Talmud asks, what does it mean to honor, and what does it mean to respect? Kabed and Tir'u, and they have a very long conversation about what these 2 words mean. Somebody's listening to the news. It doesn't sound very good. Hasn't been any good news in so long. Sherry, you'd be amazed. We do this Zoom enough. Every single rabbi, when this pandemic thing ends, is going to have a book full of Zoom stories, because people forget they're on camera, and we've seen some very powerful things.
We have seen some very yes.
Yes, right. So you wouldn't be amazed what we see, but every colleague or tech person in a congregation can write this book. And it's interesting also, as the pandemic has moved forward, there's more people who don't show their video. I've actually noticed that. And I've had congregations, actually the one this morning that I was dealing with in North Carolina, the Valerie there, her name is Julie, asked the people, please don't. It's disconcerting to look at nothing but black boxes with your name. It's just, everyone's going to have a bunch of stories with this. It's really funny. So the Talmudic conversation, and this is why it takes a little bit longer, because the genius of the tradition is that the texts and the interpretation anticipate so much of what each one of us is going through. So in the conversation of what does it mean to honor and what does it mean to respect, and there's all kinds of, you shouldn't interrupt your parent. You have to treat them with dignity. The concept of dignity comes through all the time. In fact, that's really one of the bottom line things. And you saw it in last week's Torah portion. The idea of individuals having dignity. And you may not, in Jewish tradition, do anything to take away a sense of dignity to another human being, especially in the context of the Talmudic conversation, your parent, Av ve'em. But in truth, it goes to, and with the caregiving issues, because you have people in the congregation who are not only caring for mom and dad, they're caring for a spouse, they are caring for a child, they may be caring for a sibling, an aunt, or an uncle. We just lived through that in my own family with my brother-in-law. This issue of dignity itself is worthy of another little sidetrack, because this concept of dignity, now when you factor in medical technology, this is where a lot of the game is being played right now. What does it mean? What does it mean to all of you? If we had a lot more time, we'd go into this a little bit. And we did a little bit at the Wise Aging cohort. What does it mean to have that sense of dignity, especially as life begins to end? or as each one of us begins to undergo just the normal challenges and losses that, if we are given the gift of life long enough, that will include. In other words, I don't see as well as I used to. I don't run as fast as I used to. I never ran fast in my life, but certainly I'm even slower now. But in the morning, if I get up and say, okay, let's go, I got lots of things to do. Some of the mornings my knees turn around to me and say, look, you may want to go, but we're not quite ready to go yet. So we're just going to stay in bed for a little while longer until we get the knees working. But if you want to go ahead and think the great thoughts, fine, but you're not going anywhere. Necessary losses, which is a whole, and how we treat those necessary losses, by the way, also goes to the sense of dignity, and people deal with them very, very differently. And that's another story for another time. But this idea of dignity, especially now as we deal with the longevity of the gift of medical technology, allowing people to live a lot longer. So I live in a state, I think there is a bill in Maryland in the legislature that basically has died. But I live in a state of New Jersey where medical aid in dying is legal. In fact, I wrote testimony in favor of the bill. There's 10 jurisdictions in the United States of America where it is legal. Canada, the entire country. But it also goes there to what it means to have the dignity or sometimes quality of life. And with the number of people on this call, there's 25, 26 screens. If we had the time to unpack what your definition of dignity and quality of life is, may be very, very different. Very, very different. And it may change by the time you're 50, by the time you're 80, by the time you're 90. This is why these conversations are extremely important. We just put all of our time to prepare advanced directive stuff on the website last week. So the Talmud talks about this. It talks about dignity. It talks about when it is appropriate and how to treat someone. And there's this, for example, this wonderful midrash from the Palestinian Talmud, because we have two, So they did that purposely to make rabbinic students go crazy, because it's not enough for us to have one Talmud. Say, well, we're going to have another Talmud, so to give you more things to worry about. There's this wonderful midrash. You may remember this from the cohort, where I didn't memorize it, but it goes like this. A man who feeds his father fatted chickens is doomed to hell. The rabbi knows this. So if I make a mistake, you'll correct me. A man who puts his father to work in the mill receives Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, paradise, reward. Counterintuitive, except this goes to exactly what we're talking about. If you infantilize an older person, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it, you sit there, you worked hard, just there. Jewish tradition says that's the wrong thing to do. That's the wrong thing to do. This happens a lot of times when we would go buy something. We did this at so forgive me. When you would go and go to the supermarket for your mom or dad who are in their apartment or their assisted living, and you go and you bring them the groceries, and they say, how much do I owe you? And of course we want to say nothing. Yes, Jewish tradition says that's the wrong answer. The right answer, it's $30. I mean, a bag from Giant is at least can be $30 if you have bags anymore. We just got rid of plastic bags in New Jersey. Nobody knows what to do. The idea here is, and the Talmud says this, and the Jewish tradition says, you don't infantilize. You don't take away somebody's dignity. And it also understood in the discussion in the Talmud that money can be a means of control. And this gets played out all the time. All the time. So this, even in the caregiving thing, to not reduce a person's dignity, even at the end of life, is a Jewish response. You don't infantilize. You don't do what some people call the third person invisible. This goes to the whole conversation about ageism. You know, you're sitting there with your 85-year-old father, and the doctor walks in and talks to you about the man sitting right there. And that's contrary to Jewish tradition. You talk to the person, you know. I'm generalizing, but I probably could be safe in betting that some of you have experienced this, either personally or with friends of yours. And it is very infantilizing. So one of the other discussions in the Talmud not only is about dignity and non-infantilizing and treating everybody as a human being, B'Tselem Elohim, as a Tselem, but also asks the question of who pays. And this is where that conversation about the supermarket thing, they actually raise this issue in the Talmud, in the discussion in Kiddushin. And they understand that for us, what we usually do in our world, and even in the Talmudic world, is we pay through time. Many of you, some of you, I would imagine, because I had to do this taking care of my mom, who died of dementia. Dementia got her in her 90s. But when you take that, when your mom or dad or somebody to the doctor, and you wait with them, and then you go to the pharmacy to get the prescription filled, and then you may go to the diner and have lunch, and then you take them back to their apartment or to their facility. You've expended time, and if you are salaried, you may be able to get of it. But if you're working by the hour, which is even more now with the gig economy, you may have sacrificed a day's worth of pay. You pay through time. You pay through time. And this is what's amazing about this conversation within the Jewish context. This is the Talmud. This is part of our tradition, who understood. What else did it understand? You're commanded to honor, and you're commanded to respect. Toss-up question, first person raises, buzzes in correctly. It's like Jewish Jeopardy, okay? What are we not commanded to do? We are commanded to honor, and we are commanded to respect. What are we not commanded to do? Rabbi, do you know the answer?
Love.
That is correct. We're not commanded to love. Now, this is a whole different conversation. In one of the workshops that we do is on new rituals for new life stages. I think we did some of this with a cohort. But one of the rituals that we just found is a prayer, a Kaddish. It was published in Tablet Magazine in 2019. Tablet Magazine is an online Jewish magazine. It is a Kaddish for an abusive parent. And it was written by a young woman who basically said, I am struggling. This person who is abusive, who is horrible to me, has died. How can I say Kaddish? And she wrote this very, very powerful. Did we do this at the cohort? Did I read this to you? I may not. I did. It's
actually been in our Yisker book for 10 years.
Has it really?
Absolutely.
Oh, cool. It's a very powerful thing. But again, this goes right to the heart of what we're talking, honor and respect. The love thing is a very, when we do this in a longer study, this usually comes up a lot of people who walk this walk, because it's more prevalent, and I think and there are different types of, as you know, abuse, verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, psychological abuse, other than physical abuse. In an essay that talked about filial responsibility in light of the fifth commandment, one of the professors of rabbinics at the Hebrew College, really wrote on exactly this issue, and basically says, well, let me read it to you. I can squeeze this in. The tradition demands that he or she give something. Nope, wrong. It's called over preparing. Here we go. Children are created in God's image. This is from Dr. Chernick, Michael Chernick, who's a professor of rabbinics. Children are also created in God's image. Their lives cannot be swallowed by the crushing of their individuality under impossible burdens created by parents. Indeed, the commandment of respect and honor are incumbent upon children, listen to this, only when parents observe the commandments required of them. An attack upon the source of Jewish values, the Torah, by the parents invalidates the parents' rights provided by that source. Parents who have been irresponsible, cruel, neglectful, and harmful to their children have failed to uphold their obligations in Jewish law and practice to their children. Hence, they have forfeited the honor and respect with which Jewish law entitles them. Unquote. So that's a very difficult paragraph to read and assimilate, because it basically is saying that parent has abrogated their responsibility, and thus you under no obligation. Can you? And all of us have been in a situation, every clergy person, where the person has sat in the office and said, look, this person walked out, he or she was abusive, etc., but they need my help. And I don't want to do anything, but I know there's an ethical or moral obligation from my Judaism. And to walk that pastoral counseling role through what is appropriate or inappropriate within a context and within a history. Because again, this is all a family systems issue. Very rarely does this operate in isolation. Because look, caregiving is you can go to Barnes and Noble's down the street on Ricestown Road, that shopping center before you get to the Beltway, where I've had lunch too many times. And I think there's a Barnes and Noble there. There is, right? Because I spent money there. It's an occupational hazard that we have problems walking by bookstores. It's like, well, we'll go in and I'll see. And then you know, if you get out of there under $50, it's a shehechianu moment. But you can go there and tomorrow read every book on caregiving. And in many ways, it's meaningless, because we all do it in our own way. Caregiving, like grief, is a very personal, subjective thing. And we do so in many ways influenced by how we were raised. And if you're in a multi-sibling family, there's usually a designated caregiver who is assigned that role, either purposely or subconsciously, during the time that they were growing up. If you were like me, I'm an only. So there were no brothers and sisters. And I remember coming out of, I think I may have told you this, coming out when it was really towards the end of where my mom was. And it was very painful, very painful. And sitting in the parking lot and just unable to move after the visit, just unable to just move. And I picked up the phone and called a friend of mine and said, you know, I just wish I had a brother or sister that could share this in some way. And this person burst out laughing and said, you don't understand. You know how lucky you are, because I have a brother or a sister, and believe me, that the negotiation, the tension, the expectation, you don't want any part of it. It's very personal. That's why this caregiving thing needs to be discussed on a regular basis within congregational life, because it is very, very personal. And when you factor in the economics and the long distance, it can get even worse. So thus the Talmud and this conversation about dignity, respect, honor, who pays, love, etc., etc. These are longer, much longer conversations that all emerge from the text. There's congregations who have done a tremendous job. There are congregations who have caregiver honor Shabbats. We published some of this stuff, prayers and some of the rituals. We've published caregiver prayers, Misha Berach for caregivers. In the Shleimut program, you probably have done some of this stuff. It's readily available, and if you ever want some of them, I got a ton of them, and it's part of the stuff that we do, and etc. But here's another issue. Oh, okay. Just wait 1 second. It's just tea. See.
We just said, hope it's whiskey. And as soon
No,
as
no.
you said it, you said, it's just tea. It was
It's
like you
just-
heard us.
I'm not a. If I had a drink now, you'd ask my kids. I would be like, I start giggling, and then 30 seconds later, I'd be asleep. I'm not a. Never enjoyed that, and I don't want to enjoy it. I've been around. That's another story. Another issue that emerges, to which our tradition has a response, believe it or not, is that conversation that Rabbi Goldstein has had, and others with members of the congregation who will walk into that office and say, I really am, I'm concerned, I am anxious, I can no longer care for fill in the blank. It's become too much. They're falling. I can't pick them up. I can't manage things. I'm still working. It's just overwhelming, and I'm concerned about my loved one's own safety. And now is time, I think, that we have to have the conversation about where to go. But I remember 5 years ago, I was at lunch with my father, and we were sitting at S&H, if it still exists. No, many stories about that place on Baltimore Street, the old Baltimore Street. And sitting at S&H and saying, no matter what you do, with the finger, no matter what you do, don't you ever put me in one of those places. And I promised my father, but I'm concerned that if he continues to stay where he is with me and or living independently by himself, Rabbi, we get a call at 1 o'clock in the morning from his neighbor that they smell gas, or he fell, and we have a caregiver, but we know that. But I made a promise. This is not fiction. I will guarantee you that this question has been raised in many congregants' families. I will guarantee you that your rabbi has had this conversation, and probably when you do some of the Shleimut programming, you've had some of this conversation. This is a very difficult. But again, if we go to the tradition, if we go to the text, we can find guidance. This is the beauty of Jewish tradition. And our fault is we don't teach this enough. So if you go to Maimonides, 12th century Egypt, the court physician to the Sultan, a practicing physician, and his writings, which is a magnificent mini class if you ever want to do something, because he's brilliant. In one of Maimonides' writings, he writes, and this is not an exact or literal translation, one whose parent has become incompetent should try to deal with him or her according to their condition until they are healed, just like all of us have done. Many of us, I don't know all of you, but many of us who've walked this walk, we have done that to the best of our ability. But if it is impossible for the child to bear because the parent is so radically changed, the child may go and leave the parent in the care of others. I will tell you that in counseling, we do a lot of consulting and counseling work, obviously, in this area. And when I was in the congregation, when you have this conversation with a family who come to you and say, how can I do this? I made this promise. I can't live with the guilt. When you say, look, in this particular circumstance, this is what Maimonides was talking about. All you may be doing now is following part of Jewish tradition in a certain context. I'm a big believer in my own personal theology of context. And my understanding of Jewish law is that it is very contextual. And that very few things are black and white. There's a lot of gray. And as we get older, we understand that gray is very, very pronounced. That very few things are either or. And so, and this idea of applying the context to the particular situation, and in applying that context to the situation, you can begin to examine and develop a Jewish response. This passage from Maimonides, I think, is so crucial because it is being played out right now in your congregation. Right now, there are families in your congregation who are sitting around the family room or the table, maybe on a Zoom call with relatives and family members who may not be in Baltimore, and saying, we have to make a decision. We have to try to figure out what the next step is. And that's complicated because there's various levels of assisted living facilities. There are various levels of CCRCs, continuing care retirement communities. There are various ways of paying for that. There are various ways of getting patient advocates to help you navigate the system. This is a very complex, it's not something that you do, on a Tuesday for a Wednesday, unless, God forbid, you have an emergency. So all of this is by way of saying we have this hugely rich tradition, this magnificently rich tradition. And one of the things that is emerging quite rapidly as a result of all this is, in addition that all of us should be having a plan for the end of our life, our advance directive, our durable power of attorney for healthcare, a consultation with our physician for a possible PULSE form, a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, which supersedes the advance directive because it's a medical record. It's a physician's order instead of my wish. Very important that people in the congregation understand that, and whether how Maryland, the state of Maryland accepts this and sees this, because it's different in some states. All of that has now led to the conversation that we now push about, in addition to the end of life, that you need to have a conversation with your family about developing a care plan, C-A-R-E, a care plan. And so we put on the blog 2 blogs ago, I think, an article called, I think, Who Will Hold Your Hand? And in that article, and we did it around Passover in conjunction with National Healthcare Decision Day, which was April 16th, which happened to coincide with first day of Yom Tov. So we put together 4 questions. So when you sit down with your family or yourself and begin to think about this, and the more complex the system gets, the more I am convinced that we need this. Here are the 4 questions. Think about this as it relates to you. This is all in print. It's on the website, so you don't have to take notes. It's all there. We did it all. 1, what is my wish as to where I wish to be cared? If I wish to remain at home for as long as possible, is my home set up for this? We want to age in place. Every single poll taken by everybody says it is our desire to stay home, to age in place. Is your home capable of doing that. The house I live in now, my wife's out of town, so I can say this without getting yelled at, because you never know, is totally non-accessible. And my kids have actually started to yell at me about this, and Jane does not want to have this conversation. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to me. But we have a very steep steps that go from the second floor to the first floor. And if you were ever you could never get up and down. And there's only one place in the entire ground floor where you could move a hospital bed, as some of you may have had that experience, so that you don't have to go up and down steps. Where do I want to be? Where do I want to be? Now, there are people who say, look, I don't want to be the B word, the burden. So let's go find a good place and let's do the investigation, because if I eventually have to go into a facility, I want to have the ability to do the research ahead of time. But if I really don't, and I want to stay at home, is your house accessible? And by the way, there are now places that will help you do this. And somebody just sent me, where is it? Oh, I can't find it. Somebody just sent me from someplace another person who wrote another book on the distinctions between assisted living and CCRCs and all the various, and how to look for them. And this is all over, and AARP can help you with this. But this is an important question. Even now, to go through as we get older, your house, to make sure there are no loose rugs, that the lighting is acceptable. What's the greatest fear? Ask the orthopedics people in your congregation. People our age, is falling. You fall, break your hip. Your life changes, whether you like it or not. Your life changes. Mobility. These little, and you can do this within the congregation. Where do I want to be? If I can't be cared for by myself, where do I want to know? If I want to stay home, is my house adaptable enough? And by the way, if you look at some of the articles, it's a very fascinating thing. We've actually posted some of this stuff on the Facebook page. There's now a developing subsection of architecture who are building these facilities, condos and apartments for our age who are retiring, who are building them with wider doors for in case you need a wheelchair, and even little things like accessibility for people in wheelchairs for congregations. When we did the disabilities project about rubber mats in the wet weather, but also moving the mezuzah from the top, because if I'm in a chair, I can't reach that, and having a mezuzah down lower, so people who want to can do that without, because they can't reach it. Little things, and there are and committees in congregations who have pre-pandemic, mostly right now, and it could be an activity for to just walk through the synagogue. Is the font in the newsletters, the lighting in the sanctuary, little things. But as people get older, it goes into, and the same thing in your house. The same thing in the house. Question number 2. Do I have an adequate financial and legal plan in place? Do I have an adequate financial and legal plan in place? You'd be amazed how many of my generation who've never gone to a financial advisor, or who dabble. But especially right now in this pandemic, with the possibility of a recession, it is really important to have enough cash on hand, to have a financial plan that, God forbid, you perhaps need to dip into that to pay for home health care workers. Not everybody has long-term care insurance. The numbers of people who are selling long-term care insurance has dwindled. And from what I've been told by the people who sell it, there are increasing numbers of restrictions. Why? Because we're living longer and tapping into more needs, and the expenses of healthcare keep going up. Number 3, between my spouse and children or child, have we discussed a division of responsibility? This is especially important if children are not local. Between my spouse and children or child, have we discussed a division of responsibility? This is especially important if children are not local. Now, a lot of our kids don't live near us. God forbid something happens. Who's taking responsibility? Do I expect the kids to fly in from Pittsburgh and Atlanta? Do I expect that? How are we going to handle that? And to show you how important this has become, we're going to be this on time, okay? I have no trouble falling asleep tonight. When we first started talking about this, I immediately got a nasty letter or email from somebody. He said, dummy Richie, again, you made the mistake of everybody. Suppose I don't have a spouse. Suppose I don't have a child. What do I do then? So we now have developed, in fact, I just taught this morning in the class, and one of these people are going to be interviewed for the podcast in June. This concept of what is called solo agers, S-O-L-O. You may not be familiar with this term. You have them in the congregation. These are people who are alone. They have no relatives, they not have spouse, children, or their children are far away. They are basically alone without that support system. And to show you, this is for this lady who's going to be on the podcast. I have to interview her. This is called Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers by a Dr. Gieber. She's out in California. It's nothing but exactly what we're talking about, but aimed at people who have no support system, who have no family, who have no children. Okay. This is part of the conversation, because unless you're totally different than every other congregation I've ever dealt with in the last 49 years and 11 and a half months, you have this population. And according to Dr. Gieber, there's approximately 19% of baby boomers who fall into the solo ager category. That's pretty significant. That's pretty significant. So that third question, by the way, this whole caregiving thing, this is going to put increasing stress on congregational care and communities, because there's going to be an increased demand on faith communities to be present and to be supportive. So whether you do this out of the Shlemut program or care and community program, but as this thing emerges, this is something else that's going to be part of the conversation. Last question. Have I made my wishes known in the event my illness progresses to the point that I cannot make my wishes known? In other words, has everybody on this call updated their advance directive, updated their power of attorney for healthcare, their proxy? You have to do that every 4 to 5 years. Why? Because medical technology changes and you change, and your family system has changed. What you may have defined as my wishes at the end of my life and my definition of quality of life 10 years ago may be significantly different than it is now in the year 2022. And if you don't update that and reevaluate that with your family, or at least yourself, you may be then subject to what you said before you changed your mind. And the family dynamics have changed. So people who were single because of widow or widowhood or divorce may now be recoupled or remarried. Have they updated those documents? When you do this annual forum around the whole gestalt of caregiving, this is part of it. So these 4 questions, I suggest you can go into the beginning of developing a family care plan. What is my wish as to where I want to be cared for? If I wish to remain at home, is my home accessible? Is it set up to care for me? 2, do I have an adequate financial and legal plan in place to make sure that I can be cared for? 3, between my spouse and child or children, have we discussed the division of responsibility? Especially important if children are not local. And now, if I am alone, who is going to be able to take care of me if I'm totally without a family support system? Because my friends who I rely on may be around my same age and may be going through the same thing that I'm going through. And 4th, have I made my wishes known in the event my illness progresses to the point that I cannot make my wishes known? That I'm going to suggest to you is an outline of developing a care plan based upon how Judaism approaches the idea of caregiving, based upon kabed and tir'u, to honor and respect, the Talmudic conversations that talk about everything from how we honor, how we show respect, the concept of dignity, the concept of paying through time and love, and even not commanded to be loved, parental-child relationships in the context of this negotiation, and the permission through Maimonides' proof text of when it is permissible under certain contexts to literally cede care to a third party. This is especially, by the way, being played out in Alzheimer's and dementia, where we may be caring for someone, and if you don't, and by the way, parenthetically, for those of you who watch This Is Us on NBC on Tuesday nights, the last 3 sessions, other than you crying a lot, but dealing with how this family is dealing with the dementia and the gradual decline of cognitive ability and mobility of their mother, and playing out within the family dynamics. You could take 15 minutes out of the last 4 programs and really put it together as a text for a class, because it really opens the door. There's discussions in there that come right out of the conversation about caregiving and family responsibility and who's in charge. That thing 3 weeks ago of I nominate you. I don't want to give you a spoiler. I nominate you, my daughter, and the brothers, the male. Oh, how can they go? It's fascinating study in what's being played out again right now in your congregation. So this care plan based upon Jewish text, understanding the larger macro shift now in this caregiving tsunami that includes the economics of aging, the spiritual challenges, the economic challenges, and the personal challenges. Because in this caregiving issue, we do this, it is a passionately private act where there are great spiritual transformations that can take place. Great spiritual transformations that can take place. The reversal of roles, the reconciliation of past hurts, a bond and understanding of parent and child that finally come together, the idea of legacy. All these things are part of this whole conversation. I would hope that next year your congregation could institute an annual series of educational programs around who's going to hold my hand, and all the state and local resources, the Jewish text, and just the conversation. Because believe me, it needs to be had. It needs to be had. And the worst time to make a decision, some of us may have done this, the worst time to make a decision is in the moment of crisis. When the phone call comes at 11 o'clock at night and you have to jump on a plane to get to Boca because mom or dad had a stroke or something has happened, down the street, that's not the right time to make a decision. Because a lot of times those decisions come back and haunt us. Okay. Questions, comments, Your time's yours. You got time.
You can either unmute or raise your hands or put something in the chat.
And again, JewishSacredAging.com is how you get a hold of me. Rabbi address at JewishSacredAging.com. If something comes up as a result of this, you want to have a question, just email me. If you want to write for the website like Lee does, the invitation's yours. And
Sherry has her hand raised. Good.
Yes.
Very-
Is there any Judaic text when it is spouses and there is one spouse, not a parent-child relationship, about ceding responsibility to other safe people and care?
Yes, it's the same, Sherry, it's the same text.
Okay.
The context, the initial conversation is around father and mother, but it really is, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is applicable to the entire caregiving conundrum. And I'll give you a perfect example. I'm working with a physician, a critical care and palliative care physician in California, Dr. Jessica Zitter, who produced a film, the pilot of which the trigger is on our website, called Caregiver, A Love Story. And what it is the story of a woman named Bambi in her 50s, contracted cancer, came home to die, and her husband, Rick, second marriage, by the way, her husband, Rick, who gives up his work to take care of her. And the stresses and strains of spousal relationship, and it touches all the issues that we talked about tonight. We piloted in 3 congregations that I've been teaching at since January to get their reaction, because it's not in public release. We're trying to figure out how to get it into congregations. But I would suggest to you, when it becomes available, it is a powerful program. For the Shleimut program of your congregation, powerful. But make sure you have somebody who can facilitate the conversation afterwards, because there's so many nuances. And it's a multi-gender, because he's also caring for a 3-year-old granddaughter, because the biological daughter couldn't handle being a parent. So this guy is giving up his job, caring for his dying wife, caring for a 4-year-old granddaughter, all at the same time. It's as if you took the Talmud and put it on a movie. Jackie?
Thank you.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hiya.
It's so great to see you.
Nice to see you too. How you doing?
Yeah, good. I feel so jazzed every time I hear you talk.
Yeah.
One of the things that people come to me about often, and I'm working in the field of aging, is are people who have worked all of their lives, but they don't have enough money for the kind of care they know they will need. And I imagine that a lot of people come to you about that. And I wonder how you might be advising people about that.
I'll tell you something. This is why the economics of aging, we included it now, and when we do the longer series of stuff on caregiving, this stuff came up. What's today? Thursday?
Yeah.
I was teaching someplace. It's been a very heavy week of teaching, and I was at another congregation. I think it was yesterday, or it may have been Tuesday. Doesn't make any difference. But this came up.
Yeah.
When somebody said, are there funds available through the Jewish community to help me in this situation? And in the area that this congregation was, my sense was no. That if you, now I don't know in Baltimore, if you go to the Jewish Federation or whatever it's called, you have a different name.
Associated.
Associated, right.
That's what I work for.
I thought it was a trucking company the first time I heard it. And say we have 6 people in our congregation who don't have enough money to pay for putting their loved one, placing them in the assisted living facility. Is there funds available? My hunch is the answer would be no. There aren't funds for that. We're have funds for Jewish Family Service or Ukrainian refugees or this, that, and the other thing, but we haven't raised funds for that. And somebody in this class, and I do not remember which city it was in, it was either here in Cherry Hill or in Portland, said they had a friend in another city, it was not that city, where their federation actually went and had a foundation that was able to help them. So maybe, through family foundations or foundations through the associated, that could happen in Baltimore. But the majority of Jewish family services and Jewish federations, which are under huge attack right now for funding, if Rabbi Goldstein went and said, I need $20,000 to help people in my congregation to pay to go here or to bring family caregivers in 5 hours a day because it's a single mom who's working, I would venture to say that we feel sorry for, that's not who we are. So it's very tough. The economics are serious. I mean, it's frightening. It's frightening because it really, that's what I'm saying. Most of us are one medical crisis away from financial concern, unless you have that backup. Yeah, Valerie.
Rabbi, what do you say to people who are denied long-term care insurance?
Give me an example. I mean,
like my mother had mild cognitive impairment at the beginnings of Alzheimer's. She was denied long-term care insurance, but my father was fine at the time, so he got it. But
transferable?
I don't know. I mean, they had to use her entire pension, and
that's why I beg you, if nothing else comes of this, please try to put together a program next year for the congregation so you get an elder care attorney and you get somebody who sells long-term care insurance and say, okay, this is why this happens. This is the industry right now. A lot of it goes back to the bottom line. It's like when you go to if you try to place someone in an assisted living facility, I always tell families, here's some questions to look for. Don't worry about the lobby, because they're in South Jersey, they're building these facilities that if you walk into the lobby, it looks like the freaking Four Seasons. They have a coffee bar and they have a bistro and they have this and everything. Okay, it doesn't mean anything, because my husband or my wife ain't spending all their time at the bistro. Okay? Walk the wards. Go on the floors. Smell it. How many people are just sitting in a wheelchair, okay, unattended? This is brutal, okay? And then ask, is this a corporation? I've learned this the hard way. Is this place private? Is it a not-for-profit? Or is it a for-profit? And it is a for-profit, who owns it? And you can try, if you can do the homework, because a lot of this is, I just had to do this with a family, and there's a lot of masking. But if it's a for-profit, then you have to really do understand and says, well, is the quality, what's the bottom line here? Is the bottom line of making a profit, or is it care for my loved one? And these are brutal questions. But if you're placing someone who you love at a facility, and you're basically saying, I'm giving you my loved one to take care of, their body, their soul, their whole being, their holistic, their approach, you want to make sure that they're going to be taken care of in a way that you wanted. And believe me, if you lined up all the rabbis and clergy in Baltimore County and say, have you ever heard horror stories from members of your congregation? You're going to have stories. I mean, I just lived this with a family for 3 months from Thanksgiving to the end of March. And when we tried to find out who owned it, and you have to be very careful. So people need to know this. People need to know their options and what some of these options are, and the parameters of payment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important. It's people's lives. Remember, this is not theoretical. These are real live people, members of your congregation, who are going through tremendous amount of stress and strain. And this economics of aging, it plays in my head all the time. It just keeps coming up over and over and over again. And the system is not equitable. The system is not equitable by any stretch of the imagination. And there is privilege. And it has to do with economic and social standing and economics. It is 1/4 after. I'm going to be respectful of your time. Are there any other? Once, twice, sold. To all of you, thank you very much for the invitation. Just stay safe, stay healthy. Rabbi Hatzlacha in the next chapter.
Rabbi and Yasher Koach for
Rabbi.
bringing up some very crucial and
Thank
critical issues. And I'm sure going forward, Shlemut will address them as we've tried to do over the last 16 years, but they're more and more pressing.
They are pressing. So you take care of yourself. I can help you with anything, any chance to get down to Baltimore. My dad wants to talk to me about sports. So
Yes.
chance. You be good. Take care.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Guys.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.